Hello and welcome to day 148 as we are reading through the Bible together. We have Proverbs 7 to 9 today and Romans chapter 9. Proverbs today is starting with the scenario of seduction. It seems to follow in some ways the text and the themes of the Song of Songs, which is another book in the Bible, but Proverbs really takes this idea in a different direction. In Proverbs here, we are looking at the impacts of a unhealthy relationship. So a quick note, as we read through this section of Proverbs, it references meat. And I just want to take a quick moment to say that we tend to take meat for granted in our lives right now in the United States. But it would have been unusual for this woman in this text to have had meat for a meal. It was very expensive and was only saved for special occasions. And so that's why there's a little bit of an explanation here. So the wisdom lesson here is inappropriate, intimate relationships lead to death. Maybe it is a spiritual death, an emotional death. Sometimes it could be a physical death. But unlike the woman in chapter 7, the woman in chapter 8 is honored and revered as the personification of wisdom. So we don't want to be looking at chapter 7. We want to be looking more at chapter 8. Lady Wisdom's wisdom is offered to all people as we go through here. There's another note I want to bring up about the city gates. When we read these references to city gates as we go through the Bibles, a lot of us in the United States today tend to think of the types of gates we see in Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, these medieval European gates where there is a moat and a gate that comes up on chains and maybe a portcullis that comes down, and there's an opening that you go through to get into a walled city. Now, the city gates in ancient Israel did have a wall going around the city, but the gate was much wider. The walls were wide enough for multiple people to be walking along, and so the city gate was very wide and sometimes was even wider than the walls of the city were. And in the city gate, there were multiple stories and there were multiple rooms. So you're kind of walking through a tunnel with rooms on each side. Now above, there would have been rooms that defenders of the city could have been in with openings where they could drop hot oil or shoot arrows or drop heavy items down on the invaders who were trying to take over the city. But the small rooms on the side were storage rooms, but they were also meeting rooms. And so think of the city gates when we read these ancient texts more as a city hall or a courthouse. This is where business people would conduct business. This is where judges would sit to hear cases and come up with decisions to resolve conflicts in the city. So when you're thinking city gates in the Bible, think of a place of business, a place of decision, a place of civic leadership. And so it's a lot more complicated place with a lot more going on. So this chapter's focus is that if you want wisdom in your life, you need to pursue it. And when you receive wisdom, it comes with resourcefulness and courage and prudence and knowledge. Wisdom is more valuable than gold and silver. Now, chapter 8 has a major disputed verse in the Bible. Was wisdom present at the creation of the universe? What was wisdom's role? Now, the Jewish Study Bible suggests that the context best fits with an understanding of wisdom as a ward or a child of God, a child that God was caring for. Nowhere else in the Bible is Lady Wisdom implied to have helped create earth. And so this is one of those places where there are sections of the Bible that contradict each other or don't line up with each other. Now, depending on your translation, some of them say something about playing before God, the play of the wise. What this means traditionally is studying. When you're playing before God, you are studying before God. There's a strong Jewish tradition of study and learning, and that's what they're talking about here. This reinforces the idea that we should be engaged in the text, we should be learning about God, we should be studying God so we can know God in our lives and come to love God and receive the gift of wisdom. Chapter 9 contrasts wisdom with folly in personification of behavior of two women. Following folly might be easier, but it leads nowhere good. Remember, These are instruction books, these wisdom books on how to find more wisdom in our life and make good choices and how to avoid the bad stuff. Turning to Romans and Paul's letter, Paul is showing sadness for Israelites who don't understand Jesus. There's a long history of the Israelites knowing God and then turning away from God. The Israelites are God's people because of God's promise. They are not God's people because of a genetic bloodline or because of what they have done. God has simply promised to be with the Israelites. God's plan is not dependent on us and our choices, just like it wasn't dependent on the Israelites' choices. It is an enduring promise that we can rely on, and this is one of the great messages of Paul in the book of Romans. Now, there is a good question that's brought up in verse 19. If God's in charge, what say do we have? What role are we playing? And who are we to question God? Now, mercy and compassion come from God, and God calls us. It's not the other way around. We're not looking for God. We're not calling for God. God is the one who is calling for us to turn to God. We see people embrace God, and then when they let God fix their lives, when they are willing to change with God's presence in their life, then things are better. Other people trust themselves and don't notice God, don't turn to God, don't have the power of God to bring change to their lives. So there's a long text here. And the point is, do we put God at the center of our lives, or do we trust on our own resources? When we turn to God and let God do the calling to us, give ourselves to God, let God change us, we are stronger. We are more filled with the wisdom that our Proverbs reading was telling us about. But if we turn to our own resources, our own understandings, it's like following Lady Folly in the Proverbs. We tend to be misguided and things tend to go off the rails in those situations. We'll see you next time as we continue to work through Proverbs and Romans.